In the last few sessions we have discussed some important aspects of raga. We have seen how each raga admits of certain swaras. So, each raga is associated with some swaras, and those swaras are treated with certain gamakas, and the melodic expression, the melodic movement follows certain established phrases. That is how the raga is explored. Now, when we say that a composition is in Todi Ragam, or it is in Shankarabharanam, or that he sang or Alapana in Begada, what we mean is this, that composition or that Alapana had only those swaras with those gamakas, and the exposition followed, used the phrases, established phrases that bring out that particular raga. That is what we mean by saying that a piece of music, whether a composition or an improvisational segment, when we say that this is in a certain raga, this is what we mean. It is much like what we mean by saying that, for instance, I am right now speaking in English, or that a certain book is in English, a particular language. The analogy between raga and language is has captured the imagination of many actually, and many people have tried to explore this the parallels between raga and language. There are obvious limitations to the analogy, but it is quite interesting to see in how many different aspects we can compare raga and language. Now, like language, raga also has, we can say that raga has a vocabulary, and we could say that vocabulary is its swaras, the swaras in it. And immediately we can see the limitation of the analogy, that a language's vocabulary grows, whereas a raga's vocabulary, if it is the swara, it obviously cannot grow. And then you have grammar, you have grammatical rules, rules of composition in language. We have similar rules in the case of ragas. The one glaring limitation of this analogy between raga and language is that a raga does not have meaning, or a phrase in a raga cannot have meaning the way language does. But there are scholars, there are musicologists who argue that in the case of raga we can speak of a different kind of meaning. But even so, we can, when we just talk of a certain raga, when we take a raga like Shankarabharanam or Begada or Kalyani, there are dozens of compositions in this raga, and possibly hundreds. And if we were to think of alapana or other kinds of improvisation in the raga, there would have been thousands of such expositions of that raga, and each of them will be very similar to each other in certain respects, and yet they will never be identical. Now, that is the power of raga, that there is a framework, there are rules, there are bounds, there are limits, and yet within these limits and within these bounds, and while following all these rules, there is still immense scope for creativity, immense scope for improvisation. There are some expectations or requirements of a raga. One is that a raga should have a minimum of 5 swaras. Less than 5 swaras will probably, we can quite imagine that the scope of a raga with fewer than 5 swaras, the scope would be pretty limited. The scope of creating melodic movements, melodic patterns, if the raga has less than 5 swaras, that would be quite limited. So it is expected that for a group of swaras to possibly become a raga, there have to be at least 5 swaras. I mean, the question could be whether new ragas can be created, and yes, they can be, and they are created all the time. And when we think of that phenomenon, and also when we look at the actually extant, the actually available ragas, this is a fairly commonplace expectation that a raga would have a minimum of 5 swaras. But there are musical minds who like to test boundaries, and we have Vidwan Balamurali Krishna, who almost as if to challenge this expectation that a raga should have 5 swaras, he created this raga called Lavangi, which has only 4 swaras, Sa, Re, Ma, Dha, and he has even created a composition in this. You can hear a rendition of this at this YouTube link. Another general expectation of a raga is that it should have either pa or ma, one of the two notes. It cannot skip both pa and ma. And 99.9% of ragas obey this, and again we have challengers to this expectation. Muttaya Bhagavatar created this raga called Niroshta. Pa and ma are both what are called labials. They can be pronounced only when the lips are brought together. So even the raga's name, Niroshta, has no place for a labial, and this raga has neither Panchama nor Madhyama. Sariga Dhanisa. That is those are the swaras in this raga. And again, a rendition of a composition by Muttaya Bhagavatar can be found at this link. It's a rendition by the Priya sisters. So there are, but even though we have these exceptions of ragas, 1 or 2 ragas here and there, with lesser than 5 swaras, or as far as I know only 1 raga which has neither Panchama or Madhyama, by and large the rest of the ragas admit of at least 5 swaras, and they would have either the pa or the ma. So we have ancient ragas like Shankarabharanam and Begada and Kedara Gaule on the one hand, and we have newer creations like Lavangi and Niroshta and many others. Even as we speak, ragas are being created. It is possible, because if you think of a raga as essentially a melodic fabric with some notes and not some others, then it is possible to think of a completely new melodic combination and try to create a viable raga out of it, and this sort of thing happens. I mean, it's not easy, but it is very possible. And as we will see later, there was a rigorous system, a rigorous method of generating scales that was put in place sometime in the beginning from the 15th to the 17th century, 18th century. We had this development in the Lakshana Grantha tradition where a system for generating scales was evolved. So when we have that, it is not a Herculean task to think of a completely new, hitherto unknown combination of swaras. A computer could do it. But what then is the difference between what do we make of this music, of this tradition, Carnatic music, which on the one hand has ancient ragas and on the other hand has ragas that are being created ever anew? Is there a difference between a raga like Shankarabharanam and a raga like Niroshta, or even a raga like Sunada Vinodini, which is also completely, it's just a combination of swaras, and it was handled by composers like Mysore Vasudevachar. Is there a difference? I would say there is a world of difference between a raga like Niroshta and a raga like Shankarabharanam, and along with me many musicians would say that there is a world of difference, because a traditional raga like Shankarabharanam or Riti Gauli or Ananda Bhairavi, they have been handled over centuries by great musical minds, and these ragas have a certain character. They have gained many dimensions, and to engage with such ragas, there is so many more dimensions to that musical endeavor. To try to sing a Shankarabharanam is a completely different deal from trying to sing a raga like Niroshta. Because in Shankarabharanam, you need to have grasped the raga swarupa, the phraseology, the gamakas. You need to have absorbed all the musical effort that has gone into this raga over these decades, over centuries. Whereas with a raga like Niroshta, it is just a combination of swaras, and it's up to you to work patterns out of this set of swaras. In fact, with a raga like Niroshta or Sunada Vinodini, we won't even speak of a raga swarupa. There is no raga swarupa or raga bhava that is associated with such scalar ragas, what is called scalar. Scalar as in scale. The raga is just a scale of swaras. So these two types of ragas are a world apart, but both of them find place in contemporary Carnatic music. Though, of course, we have musicians who prefer one kind of ragas over the other, and some musicians who are tolerant of both kinds of ragas. So today, in the context of contemporary Carnatic music, we can speak of broadly one kind of classifying ragas would be to talk of two kinds of ragas. One is ragas like Shankarabharanam or Kedara Gauli or Shruti with a long history of evolution. And the other would be ragas which are newfangled, new creations, which are nothing more than a combination of swaras, and there is nothing more about their personality or form. There are no expectations regarding phraseology or even gamaka for that matter.